You went from being an entrepreneur to an extremely successful investor, made a lot more wealth after Tinder that you actually made from Tinder.
I started off making private investments in companies. I was doing really well. I was up probably over 20x in aggregate from the dollars I invested. There's not a direct correlation between risk and reward. So I think it's important to spend your time and allocate your resources to those opportunities where there's asymmetric risk, putting your eggs in a basket where the risk reward profile is best. Understanding that is extremely important. I think when you're investing in companies, you're actually learning a lot more overall because you don't have tunnel vision where you're focused on one thing day in and day out, and you have perspective. I enjoy watching the company go from like essentially nothing to becoming a large company and then being a part of that journey.
This episode is brought to you by Brex, a brand I'm proud to have co-founded and one that's shaped by the same journey many of you are on. Brex has everything startups and fast-growing companies need to make every dollar count, from modern corporate cards, banking, and treasury, to accounting automation, travel, and expenses. Over 25,000 companies, including DoorDash, Scale AI, and Anthropic, spend smarter using Brex. Hey everyone, today I have Justin Mateen, founder of Tinder, the very popular dating app that I guess everyone knows. And after selling Tinder, now he is an investor in both the private and public markets through his fund, Jam Funds, and his family office. So I'm excited to have Justin here. Justin, thank you so much, man, for coming.
Thanks, Enrique. Thanks for having me.
You know, I'm remembering the first time we met was at this dinner in Napa. And one of the things I remember is you were just like so curious.
My favorite vineyard, Promontory.
Yeah, it was Promontory, right? I remember you just like so curious about like every business that you came and you asked me a bunch of stuff. Like, you know, were you always kind of like super interested in business, like since you were a kid?
I've always been super interested in business, but also inquisitive. So you're not the first person to say that I asked them a bunch of questions the first time that we met. It's my way of getting to know you and understanding how you think about like the world.
Were you like that as a kid? You grew up here in LA, right?
Very much so.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you have any like funny stories from like your teachers or your parents about it?
I went to a school called Merman where you have to do an IQ test. And apparently they were asking me a bunch of questions for over an hour. And towards the end of it, I started asking the interviewer questions as well.
How old are you?
I was 6 years old.
And you're just like interviewing the interviewer.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I may end up doing that today with you.
Let's do it. So you went to this school, were you there your whole life?
It ends, I think, in 6th grade or 8th grade. So I left from that school, Merman, to Brentwood, which was high school.
Were you a good student?
At Merman, it's actually very interesting. Merman academically is supposed to be a much harder school. I did really well at Merman. At the time, I didn't realize, but a lot of the students that went there were socially inept.
Oh, really?
They were very smart, but they didn't know how to interact with other people. I actually loved it. Like looking back at it, it could have been weird, but it was a great school. I think I learned a lot. I excelled in math. At Brentwood, I actually expected the school to be easier, so I didn't try as hard, and my grades actually got worse in high school.
Oh,
like I didn't get amazing grades.
Did you care?
Not really.
No.
I wouldn't take notes in class.
And did you, like at that moment in time, like you're a teenager, did you have like a life plan to be successful, or was it like you're just, kind of going with the flow?
Just like you, Enrique, I always planned and wanted to be successful. I didn't know exactly what path.
But like, did you have any idea of the path back then? Like, oh yeah, like I'm gonna be this or that. Like, what was your kind of?
Anything that I did, I would want to win.
Whether
it was sports, whether it was a game. And I would always find myself optimizing for long-term success versus short-term success. And to this day, I think...
Well, what does that mean? Like, what did that mean in high school?
So a funny story, my dad always tells me I was at a birthday, 5, 6 years old, in an arcade. You know how you get those tickets in arcades from when you win a game? I would fill my pockets with tickets and then in the middle of the party, take it to my dad and tell him to hold all the tickets so I could get more to get the best prize at the end.
Yeah, so you're like saving to,
saving for a bigger goal.
Yeah. What do your parents do?
My mom is a homemaker. She's an amazing mother that went above and beyond for her children. And my dad's in commercial real estate.
Did you learn a lot from your dad about business?
Very much, yeah.
What were some of the main lessons that he taught you?
I think the most important lesson I learned, look, there's certain things that you learn from your dad because you want to be like them, and certain things that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
So I learned on both fronts.
Tell me about both.
So he taught me at a very young age that it's okay to fail and encouraged me to take risk without any judgment, where he's like, as long as you're doing something, you're learning from your mistakes. And if you're doing that earlier on, you're going to avoid those mistakes in the future and you'll do better, right? So he gave me that safety net and that foundation where I felt really, really safe, where I was able to take risk at a young age. It's extremely important. But then he also only focused on like tangible assets. He's in real estate. So he wanted like a building, right? Something that's like real.
Yeah.
Something that has income, something that is easier to predict. Whereas a lot of the businesses I've been involved in, you don't have that line of sight in the very beginning. You're focused on accomplishing something and seeing light at the end of the tunnel. So it's like, you know where you want to go, but it's not as obvious and it's not as safe up front.
But was that a lesson that he taught you, like focus on like assets and that you didn't follow, or he, you know, that was what he did, but he encouraged you to do everything?
A few times he was just like, there's one Mark Zuckerberg in the world and then there's a bunch of kids trying to be Mark Zuckerberg.
How did that make you feel?
It made me feel like I want to prove to him that I could be
You could be the next
Mark Zuckerberg baby.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Maybe he said that intentionally.
To motivate you.
Yeah. There's not a direct correlation between risk and reward. So I think it's important to spend your time and allocate your resources to those opportunities where there's asymmetric risk, where you have either capped downside and uncapped upside, but also let's consider eggs as a metaphor, putting your eggs in a basket where the risk reward profile is best, right? So I think it's a fallacy when you go to an investment advisor and they're like, oh, do you want high risk, high reward? The reality is everyone wants relatively low risk with high reward. Understanding that is extremely important.
Is that a lesson you learned early on from your dad, or is it something you kind of got over time?
No, I think I figured that out on my own. What I learned from my dad, so for instance, he's not good at public markets because he would want to time something perfectly, right? So if you find a stock that's undervalued, a strong company where you have line of sight and the market is missing something, my dad would buy that stock. If it was down the next day, he'd be really annoyed. The day after that, if it was down again, he'd be like, oh my God, I got to sell it. And he would just sell it at a loss just to get out. But the reality is it's very, very difficult to time the purchase of something that has daily movements that are sometimes not even correlated directly to the company, but the overall market. So the way that I think about it, I take a position, and if the market disagrees, right? If it goes down, I'll actually buy more. If I don't think anything's changed, I'll buy more. And I get excited by it because I'll be able to form a bigger position so that the win is bigger when I am right.
And do you think at this time, right? Like, you know, obviously you're doing a lot of investing in public markets and private markets. When you were kind of in this, you know, phase, and we'll get to like a bunch of the learnings on that a little bit later, but when you were a kid or a teenager and you thought about what you wanted, was finance kind of, you know, top of mind for you, or no? That was like never something you thought you'd do?
Well, I think I wouldn't consider it finance. I just think that business is the foundation of really everything. Like anything that you want to do, you need to have an element of business and math, right? But math is the universal language of the world. There's many different languages. Math is consistent and something that's accepted by everyone.
Okay, so let's go to like, you know, high school now, Justin, right?
High school.
Like, how was it like? If I met you in high school, what would I think?
You would be very young. I don't know what you'd think. I think we would, assuming we were the same age.
Yeah. Were you fun?
I think I was, you know, looking back,
Were you popular?
actually, yes and no. When I spent time with a girl that I really wanted to date, I wouldn't really have problems with that. But I also wasn't like into going, I didn't want to go to like parties and get wasted in high school either. I didn't really get wasted, I'd say, until college.
So what were you into?
I never did drugs.
What did you want to do in high school?
Learn about as many different things as I could and see what I'm interested in. And then also I would be dishonest if I said I didn't care about attracting women.
Yeah. Like every high school teenager, you know, like
I had meaningful relationships with less people, and then I had a lot of like more superficial relationships. And it wasn't until recently that I realized at one point when I switched schools in 7th grade, I was bullied. I always wondered like, what does it mean to be bullied? And looking back at it, at the time I didn't realize, I didn't want to accept that, but I went to a school where I was the only, maybe one of 2 or 3 Persians and maybe the only Persian Jew, where I one time opened my locker and someone had put a piece of paper in my locker. He had drawn a camel and said, you dirty camel jockey, this is all you're worth, with a penny.
Oh, wow.
I literally put a penny in my locker, and I knew who it was. I realized who it was. He was a funny kid who was a kind of a class clown, but was not very nice to a lot of people. So years later, I actually met him. I saw him in an elevator in the early days of Tinder. He had messaged me a few times on like Facebook trying to get lunch, and I wasn't very responsive. And he asked me again in the elevator, and I said, listen, I don't want to make you feel bad, but I don't really have any interest going to lunch with you. And I reminded him of the story.
Did he remember?
He remembered. I don't know if he remembered the exact detail. He remembered being that way.
Yeah.
Because he said it wasn't the only story like that, and he was embarrassed. And obviously I forgave him. I didn't care that much, but I had a good childhood. But there were times in school where I felt isolated, and it forced me. Look, I didn't even think about this until now. I was 13 years old in school trading stocks, public market stocks in 1999.
Really? How did you even open an account?
I had like a TD Ameritrade account. I don't know how the account was set up. I think kids were allowed to have accounts, or maybe you needed a custodian. So it was a joint account with my dad. And I was trading stocks, and I was filling up my day in a different way. I don't know. I didn't think I was nerdy, but looking back,
Maybe. What was the stock you remember trading that you did?
I've one that was very funny. There was a company called Jones Soda. I don't think it's even around anymore. And I think the stock went up maybe from like $1 or $2 to $25 or $30. And it was my biggest position. And then it crashed and came all the way back down. And then there was tech stocks. There was a company called Broadcom, Red Hat, Qualcomm. That's the time where in 1999, those stocks, you know,
Went to the moon.
yeah, they literally went to the moon.
Were you net positive, or did you sell before the crash, or you let it crash?
I was up a lot, and then I was up a lot less towards the end of it. But because I had started at the right time, at least I didn't lose money, but there was a big discrepancy between what it was valued at the peak versus what it ended up being.
Yeah,
and then
like everyone else in that time, right?
Yeah, I presume. But I mean, it was a real bubble.
Yeah. And
no one knew what was going on. It was like a game of hot potatoes.
What was your relationship with money at the time? Like, how did you think about it?
I looked at it as a game. Look, I was a kid. I don't think I spent a lot of money. It wasn't what excited me about it. It wasn't about spending the money. I knew there would be lots of good ways to spend money.
Because you can take more girls on dates, or like.
I was looking at the bigger picture of like what it would mean 20, 30 years later. She used to share stories with me about in Brazil how you would want to save money for steak dinner versus chicken. Yeah. Because steak was more of a delicacy. Yeah, exactly.
Love steak.
I didn't really think about it like that.
Interesting. So you kind of just thought about like saving it and compounding and all that.
I like the compounding effect of money over a long period of time, right? Not just from interest, but just from growing it and then reinvesting it.
You went to USC, right?
I did.
Was that kind of like where you wanted to go? You want to stay in LA?
I was a failure for going to USC.
What do you mean?
I remember specifically my mother being very, very upset with me.
Oh, really? How? Because
because I didn't get into, she wanted me to go to Harvard or Penn.
Okay.
I got waitlisted at Penn. If I maintained a certain GPA at USC, I could transfer. But
were you disappointed, or was it more your parents?
I don't think my dad cared that much. The business school at USC was great. My mom cared more.
Makes sense. What about you?
But I
You-
pledged a fraternity and I had no intention of going.
Yeah.
'Cause, you know, once you start, you form relationships and you're having fun socially. You don't want to switch schools.
So tell me, like, how was that first year of college for you? Like, what was that like?
It was so fun.
Yeah. That's the
USC,
first time you got wasted?
first time I got too wasted. Yeah.
How was college? Like, how was that first year of college? Like, what changed for you? Like, how was that, the experience?
I don't know, not so much change, but I think the independence of going to a school, even though it happened to be in LA, I lived on campus and you were able to do whatever you wanted. You had that full freedom for the first time. So that was nice. I had a great college experience. It wasn't overly academic, didn't feel overly academic, and it was still fun. You know, colleges today, like, I think it's overall, like Ivy League schools, especially, I think they're in a really dark place. I wouldn't want to go to an Ivy League, and I wouldn't want my children to go to an Ivy League right now.
What would you want your children to do?
There's a woke agenda, and I don't think that they're fun. So it's like, what's the point? Your takeaway from college, I don't think it should be so much about the actual information that you're learning in those classes necessarily. It's about being able to apply your learnings in the way that you think about things to the real world. And I think that if you don't fall exactly into place and agree with this whole woke mentality, that you'd have a tough time at Ivy League schools.
Was it not woke at all when you were?
No, I didn't feel it at all. I think it was maybe the early days, but I didn't notice it. Back to your last question, I didn't answer it correctly because you were asking about where kids would go, where I would want my kids to go to school.
Where do you want your kids to go to school?
I don't know if there's an alternative yet, but I'm hoping by the time they're old enough to go to school that there'll be a better alternative. I mean, you didn't love Stanford, did you?
It was okay. Yeah, I had some fun, but you know, if it was different, like I was already older than most kids there, and it was hard to adapt.
Because you were a year older?
I was
2 years older?
I was 20 when I got to Stanford. I think most kids were like 18, and you know, I had the company before, so it was a little bit.
Was it more culturally, or you think you were too advanced?
I was living an adult life before going to Stanford, and it was hard to adapt to college life back again. I think culturally, look, there was a lot of kind of, you know, woke stuff, but I wouldn't say that. You know, I had my own values and I had my own stuff that I believe, so I kind of just, you know, laughed at it. It wasn't like a really big issue for me when I was there.
Were you surprised when you started? Like, did you have a certain expectation sitting in Brazil in terms of what colleges would be like?
Yeah,
This is
honestly, I thought it was going to be more fun. So I'll tell you this story that's funny. So, you know, I grew up watching like American Pie, you know, and I thought colleges in the US were going to be like that. So I got to like Stanford and I can say it was not like that. And I was like very disappointed. I'm like, oh, wow, US colleges, you know. And then Laura, my wife at the time, I met her and I had dropped out already and I went to USC and I was like, oh, I think USC kind of like feels more like that. And
you mean you went to visit USC?
I went to visit USC, yeah.
It's definitely more American.
And then Laura was like, no, it's not like this, you know, like, you know, it's a very serious, you know. And then literally as she's saying that, we're walking by this like house with a pool and literally 4 girls in bikini just playing volleyball, you know. Like, and I remember I was like, oh shit, I should have gone to USC. You know?
You think you would have dropped out if you went to USC?
I think so. I think, you know, for me, college was kind of in between the two companies. So I wanted to have 6 months of vacation, you know, and going to college. That was my experience a little bit. But I just remember USC looking very, very fun. Is it like, does it stand to the reputation? Do you think it's like?
The first year was really, really fun.
Yeah.
The second year was pretty fun and gradually became less fun.
Oh, really? Why?
I think that crazy stuff had happened and the school was monitoring like fraternity row.
Yeah. Well, tell us a funny fraternity story that you had.
There's so many and they're so inappropriate. I don't know which one I could share.
If I were to imagine the founder of Tinder, I would have imagined someone who likes to go get girls, you know, like that is like, you know, like honestly, the best founder for that kind of company.
I did. but I was also a lover boy.
Oh, and so you found love easy?
No, not easily, but if I really cared about someone, I would always care.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe to a fault actually, because then it wouldn't allow me to like other people or be open after that point.
Did you have like serious girlfriends growing up?
Yeah, I had one girlfriend, but I was a little kid,
How old?
like from 13 to 16.
14 to 19, I had a serious ass girlfriend.
What happened?
We broke up when I was 19, but
Clearly.
yeah. We broke up because, you know, it was the only girl I've ever been with, and I kind of
it was
wanted
inevitable.
to. Yeah.
Did you think that you would be with her again in the future?
You know, I don't think so. I think like what happened was she was from kind of like a small town, and she kind of wanted to stay in the town, you know, kind of like the traditional small town girl family. And I always wanted to go explore the world, you know. She was like a doctor, so she, you know, it's hard to practice medicine outside of Brazil. And, you know, I wanted to go and explore the whole world. So from that point, we were incompatible, which was great. But it also gave me a lot of like security growing up, right? Like having a steady girlfriend builds a lot of security when you're a teenager.
Yeah, it does. Safety.
Yeah.
And then also, I don't know, for me, we used to always talk about like the future. Like imagine, like you talk about your kids and getting married.
Yeah.
Like
yeah, me too. How did like, you know, you had this like financial ambition, but like how did this kind of wanting to attract the opposite sex play into your motivation, you think?
That's a good question. A part of it, it's actually very funny. The girl that I dated, her father became very wealthy while we were dating. So I always wanted to be able to provide for her, like to maintain a certain lifestyle. Because I was like, oh, if we're going to be together, I need to win.
You need to like make it.
Yeah. So I think that was early on, maybe a part of the motivation.
And in your head, like, what did that mean? Like, what did you want to provide for her?
Anything that we wanted. Like,
what was that?
Just a good lifestyle, just to be able to do whatever
like
we
great
want.
house, vacation.
I think all that. I think that when you're financially stable, you're able to do what you really want. And you're not stuck in this rat race, having a 9-to-5 job where you have to report to someone and have your life laid out for you. You could actually, you don't want to do something today, you don't have to. You want to go out of town, you can go out of town. You want to spend hours learning about something, you can.
It's like freedom, right? Did you always
Complete
have
freedom.
that view that like, hey, financial stability will give me freedom?
I don't know if I realized that until later on. I just remember like certain things, like back to my dad. I remember one time he told me that he was worried. He's like, just don't want you to, he wouldn't say me, but he was talking to me as though he meant it towards me. He's like, oh, all of my friends and their kids, like, I'm worried they're all going to be Beverly Hillbillies. Like,
What is a Beverly
he just meant
Hillbilly?
like lazy people that don't really work, that underachieve and live off their parents.
Yeah.
So I was very conscious of not doing that. I wasn't worried about not utilizing his relationships or anything I could benefit, but I wanted to achieve success on a different level.
Did you feel your parents were wealthy? Did you think that growing up?
I felt they were wealthy, but there were still wealthier people. So, you know, it's always relative. There's always,
you know, in your school and stuff like that, you perceive they were wealthy. For example, my parents, I lived in the kind of like the countryside.
yeah.
And even though my parents are, you know, they would not be considered upper class if I live in São Paulo, the main city. In the countryside, I felt I was so rich, you know, because like everyone around me was less. But then I have friends, for example, that they were actually wealthy, but they went to like a super, you know, wealthy school, and then they felt poor, you know, because like everyone around them was like,
It's all relative, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember in my first school, which was way more academic, I remember kids coming over and my living room was really big.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow, I have a really big house. It's all relative, right?
Yeah.
And then in the second school, where you could tell that certain people were there because their parents donated to the school, I mean, I felt normal, but I didn't feel like I was extremely, extremely wealthy.
Yeah.
And that's also when, anytime there's a disruption in wealth, like at that time, the tech boom, you're seeing a lot of people or hearing about a lot of people that are becoming extremely, extremely wealthy. So then it just reminds you and keeps you keeps you balanced. I didn't feel like I was ever in need of anything, but I also didn't feel like I wanted more from my own life.
Yeah. So I guess like, how do you think it kind of like your parents' success impacted you at that point in time?
It was a good motivator, but at the same time, you know, I remember being 14 years old, 15 years old, and going to work on the weekends with my dad and trying to give him ideas and like, oh, we could do this and we could do that. And then later on, when I was a little bit older, but I didn't have much yet, and the whole market had turned in 2008, 2009, I kept telling my dad, now is the time where we should be buying, like he was buying real estate, like real estate now. And even when, you know, that quote, like even when it's your own blood, it's blood on the streets, it's time to buy it.
Yeah.
And he was like, if you want to do it, you go do it yourself. Like I'm dealing with my sinking ship.
Yeah.
You know? So I think I grew up with wealth, but there were also times where financially, you know, there were big losses and my dad wasn't doing as well. Before he was in real estate, he had this business that was competitive. It was a family business with 2 other families, and it was like Best Buy. At the peak, they were doing, you know, a couple $100 million in sales, and they were doing really, really well in the 80s. And then Best Buy came out, and they were more, operationally effective, I would say. And within a few years, the business was called Adres. Adres got crushed. So I think at that time, my dad had to go and restart. It was my grandpa, 2 of his friends, and then their children. But at that time, that was like a really big business. And so I saw my dad, even in his own life, probably feeling extremely wealthy to being less comfortable, to the point that I remember my grandfather, who has passed away since then, but he told my dad that he should consider pulling us out of private school because it was really expensive.
Do you think seeing that impacted you somehow?
Yeah.
Like, what do you remember?
It impacted me. I just never wanted to be in that position or feel that way. It was healthy. It was a very healthy thing to experience. And then I remember when my dad went into real estate at first, after he'd done a few deals, my dad was playing poker with his friends and they were co-investing in one of my dad's deals. And they were trying to strong arm him in terms of like changing how he wanted to structure it. And they were actually I felt like disrespectful towards him. So I always remember that, and it bothered me.
You know, yeah, I see this as a pattern. I know at least 2 other founders that had experiences that they grew up really wealthy and then something happened and the wealth went away, and that created like so much motivation of seeing the top and seeing the, you know, kind of like the bottom.
I mean, for me, it wasn't that extreme, but I think one of the worst things that one could endure is having extreme wealth, having a certain lifestyle, getting used to it,
and then having it all
and then having it lost. Yeah, having it all go away. Because I think if you don't know, then you don't know what you're missing.
Yeah.
Once you get used to it and then you lose it, I think that it's more devastating.
And tell me about
Actually, always remember, you had one of the most unique perspectives on this. Because you're 25 years old, you had made a lot of money. And I asked you, can I share this story?
Yeah, of course.
I asked you, we were in the car, and I said, Enrique, I'm like, you're doing well, but you're not doing that well to be living like this. Like, do you think that it's healthy? Like, what happens if your company fails and you don't make any money? And what you said was so interesting. You said, well, I'll know in the next year or 2 if I'm going to actually be successful. And the amount that I'm spending for the next year or 2, I can afford that. And I think that in your case, it wasn't a bad thing that you were living that way, and you were right. Right? You weren't buying a house, but you were living well. Does that make sense? So
yeah. I think
living well gave you a taste. Yeah, you were risk on, but I've never seen someone with their personal liquidity living that kind of lifestyle.
Oh, come on, dude, you grew up in LA, don't you?
I never saw someone as intelligent as you that I respected living that way.
Yeah.
Yes, I did grow up with a lot of people that came to the city and left.
Yeah.
Especially in certain areas, like in the Sunset Strip, like up in Sunset Hills, that place is notorious for, bankers or newfound money. They go there, they either rent houses, buy houses, throw crazy parties, and some of them don't make it.
I always felt that, look, I don't know if you felt the same, but I always had confidence, maybe probably overly confident that I was going to be successful since a very young age. And the other thing I always had confidence is that, or I always thought was like, look, some things are best lived in your 20s, some things are best lived in your 30s, some things are best lived in your 40s, right? So there's some experiences that you have in your 20s that if you try to have it when you're 40, it's not going to go well. And I saw so many people that are like 48, and like getting divorced and like partying like crazy. And like, that's just,
No, you're
sad.
That's very true. Like $1 that you spend today, you'll derive far more pleasure than when you're 70 years old.
Exactly. So
you can really enjoy it in a different way. And, the way I think about it, I'm safe with a good chunk of my liquidity. And then I'm extremely, extremely, extremely risky with a smaller percentage, but you can actually derive massive alpha that portion of it, like is a big swing up and down on the upside, but not on the downside.
This is really smart. I'm reading this book now called The Missing Billionaires. The idea is there were, a certain amount of people, I forgot the exact number, in the 1900s that had over 5 million of wealth.
In the 1900s. When?
And the year 1900.
Actually 1900.
Yeah. And if, all these people had invested their wealth just in the stock market, just in the S&P, and spent around, I think, 2% that they say of their wealth every year.
And if they were still living?
No. So all their heirs.
Got it.
Yeah, all their heirs, if they kind of kept doing that, we would have 17,000 billionaires just from inheritance in the US. That's like the number.
Based on the number of children they had?
Based on the number of children they have and everything.
But, I don't know, because at one point you revert back to close to the average, because if it keeps getting diluted across multiple generations, that wealth goes away.
Well, yeah, but that's the math that they said is like, even if you were to dilute across many kids, if they just kept investing and compounding, and spending 2%, we would have 17,000 heirs that would be billionaires.
That's so interesting.
And we have like 700.
I think it's more.
Well, maybe it's more, but the order of magnitude, according to them, is still that, right? So what happened, right? Like, where are all these billionaires?
I think it's a lot more than 700. Those are just people that have public positions.
That's what Forbes estimates as like kind of inherited billionaires in the US.
Oh, inherited billionaires.
Yeah, inherited.
Got it.
Yeah. So this is not counting self-made.
Got it.
This is just inherited. And the 17,000 number is just inherited, right, from the 1900 families.
That's so interesting.
And the argument of the book makes it that, look, it's what people get wrong a lot of times is not the actual investments itself, is the sizing of them. That, making a risky bet, it's fine as long as it's like a smaller percentage, of your wealth, and it can have like really high upside and you learn from it even if you lose money.
Yeah.
The problem with people either size too small on the stuff that they are good investments or too large,
Interesting.
And it's really, you should read the book. It's really good. It's very much the way they're describing it, but it has a lot of other good insights.
So basically,
it talks a lot about like how to think about portfolio construction and the sizing of everything, and why people have this like rule of 60-40 stocks and bonds, and
I'm going to read that, by the way. But I think 60-40 is too safe, by the way. If someone was asking me, I would not recommend 60-40.
This episode of HD and HD is brought to you by a brand that's close to my heart, Brex. When we started Brex, it wasn't just about creating another financial product. It was about solving the real gritty challenges that founders and startups face every day. Building something from the ground up is hard enough without having to navigate clunky legacy banks with endless fees. That's why Brex is the financial stack that scales with you, no matter where you are on your journey. From maximizing runway to earning yield on your cash, Brex was designed to make every dollar count. so you can focus on what really matters, building your dream. Whether you're just getting started or you're ready to take on the next big thing, Brex has your back. Check it out and see why the world's most innovative startups like Anthropic, Scale AI, and Robinhood trust Brex.
You had a couple business trials right before Tinder. Like, tell us, how did it all start? What was your first business?
So first business, I'd finished school early, about a year early.
Which school?
And at USC.
USC.
Yeah, so around...
Why?
I just finished my classes early. I think the last class I had was like ballroom dancing. I had some AP credits that transferred, and I finished school maybe a semester and a half early. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea. And I suck at dancing. So I didn't learn anything about dancing. Yeah. And I had ballroom dancing with football players, actually. So I'm like sitting there, standing there trying to dance. I'm like looking over, and these like football players are like dancing better than me. I'm like, they're football players, they dance better. But I had to figure out what I was going to do in a very short period of time. And at that time, I remember there was a class in a BUAD business class where I realized that the overall time spent online, I think you spend like 30 or 40% of your free time online back then in 2007. Yet only like 3 or 4, maybe 5% of ads were online. So there's a massive discrepancy in terms of where that spend would shift
Total
to.
ad spend.
Yeah, like people
Online versus offline. Versus
yeah, it's like, let's say like people are advertising on like billboards and TV, but in reality, they should have been at that time advertising online. It was a matter of time before that the spend shifted from offline to online, because that's where you were, as a consumer, spending time.
Yeah.
Right. So, at that time, like, I don't think Instagram or Facebook or any of them were monetizing, but basically I picked up on that trend that in the future, that's what would be happening. And
how did you pick that up? Like, where do you even look to find out this?
No, it's just I don't know. I just two pieces of information, and I'm like, there's a massive arbitrage here. You'd think that more spend would be happening online.
Like, how do you even know how much spend is happening online versus offline? Did you like go look?
No,
at
you
data?
could, yeah, you could look at the data. In the class, there was like there was something that either had one of those facts. Either it was the 40%.
Oh, so it came up in class.
Yeah, in a class, it was like a case study, and I realized that the spend was, there was a severe discrepancy. So there was a company I tried to build with someone that I'd met who was like 15 years older than me. We tried to embed video ads on websites, basically, on any websites where you could actually do ads for films, or, imagine creating content that people viewed on YouTube and being able to put your ad in. And we would get $3 from the advertiser per click on the video. Let's say you had a blog and you weren't making any money. You could throw in a movie trailer. You could talk about like, you would try to make it relevant to what the ad was, I think, for it to perform well.
Yeah.
But you could just, even if you didn't make it relevant, you could just throw on a video.
And you made a cut.
And anyone that saw, we would take half the revenue. So we would do like an ad deal with a movie that wanted to get, viewership and get the word out. We would do a $500K deal with them. We would keep $250, and then everyone else would make $250.
How much you raise?
It wasn't a lot. In aggregate, between this and the next thing that we did with it, I think we raised like 900 grand or $1 million.
That's a lot for like, post-kid in 2007?
2007, between 2007 and 2010.
Yeah,
that whole time frame.
It's not a very hype VC cycle yet, right? Like,
no, it wasn't.
Raise money.
YC still only had like 30 people in their class.
Yeah.
So then we made some money from those ads, but it wasn't the right time yet. It was still too early, because you had these legacy, like old school media people running these budgets, and they weren't ready. They weren't ready to place enough dollars online at that time. So then we used a portion of that technology to create a drag and drop website builder. So basically, I didn't know how to do HTML code, but I could create a website within minutes. So like Taylor Swift's official website was built off our platform
Back then?
Yeah, back then. The main idea was that we would be able to, I think it was like Wix, right?
Yeah.
Like website builders, to create a much better version of that where you pay $10, $20 a month and you can build your website. And then we could also service your website where we could use really, really cheap labor and charge you a few $100s a month. If you didn't want to do it, you just tell us what you want to change and we'll do it for you.
How did you get Taylor Swift to do
For Taylor Swift, we were charging her a few thousand a month and also providing her a
How do you
certain
even
number.
get in touch with her?
I can't remember exactly how we got through to her, but it had something to do with her dad.
Okay.
Someone had a relationship with her dad. We told her about
Like
the
through
technology.
some connections, you got to her dad's like, oh, you don't have a website. You should have a website. We're in this.
I think she had a website, but it would take, like, she would want to change her website when she's doing a concert in LA. By the time she could change it, it would take like a few weeks. That concert's gone. She wouldn't be able to change it on the fly.
So kind of like a real time.
Yeah, so it's a lot in real time. Like she could perform in Chicago, have, you know, Chicago background, the next day be in LA with beach background saying like, hey, like all my LA girls can't wait to see you tonight. So it allowed her to frictionlessly change her website on the fly in real time.
Yeah.
And what happened there, the tech was actually pretty good, but we weren't able to launch in time and it was never going to be like a massive, it wasn't going to be a multi-billion-dollar company. And
Well, why not?
without getting into too much detail, my business partner did something which caused him to have to leave the company. And I knew that it just wasn't going to,
So it's
even
co-founder issues.
if it became big, I didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I also didn't think that it could become big enough. So it was in that no man's land where I'm like, oh, like let's create a smooth landing.
Yeah.
Someone bought that company for not much. Like it was like $10 million or $15 million of stock in another company.
How did you find that buyer?
It was an individual buyer that had a lot of stock in that company that wanted that tech. So then he paid us in stock of another company and then we retained a minority stake.
Did that other company go anywhere?
No, nothing, not much. The company that we got stock in or what he did with it?
No. The company got stock in.
No, I think it was called like lockers.com. I don't even.
And then you
I think it was a zero. I think it went to zero. And then we did get some cash up front.
Got it.
Also.
Got it.
Just to like break even. I just wanted a smooth landing. It wasn't going to be what I wanted to be. And then Tinder was literally the next thing. So Tinder was a second company. I learned a lot from the first.
3 years, the first one?
Yeah, 3.5 years.
3.5 years?
4, yeah. And then we started talking about Tinder like late 2011. In 2011, we were trying to figure it out.
Co-founder, Sean, when did you meet Sean at this point?
I met him years earlier through my girlfriend when I was a kid. He had a crush on her.
No.
And she felt bad for him because he would awkwardly call her all the time. So we came across each other. That was the first time. Second time was when we were freshmen in college. We had a math class. One of us would do the homework and the other one would copy it. And we would basically take turns. We sat next to each other in one math class. I was pledging. He wasn't really, I think he was only in school for a semester or two and he wasn't living on campus. So, you know, we never got too close then. And then we reconnected about a year before Tinder. And we started talking about different ideas that we had and where there were gaps in the market and what we could build. So we had a few ideas. One was like a peer-to-peer, real-time sports betting company. One was called Butler. We actually have renderings, like back from 2011, renderings of, it was like TaskRabbit, but with better branding. And we found out that the cost of insurance when someone enters your home is so high that the unit economics wouldn't really work even at scale. So that didn't make sense. And then Tinder was one of those ideas. It was, it was called Matchbox at the time, but it eventually became Tinder. And Sean started building that when he was at Hatch Labs. He was working in an incubator One day he calls me, we're talking about all these ideas, and he's like, I got a job. I'm like, what do you mean you got a job? Like, I thought we're starting a company. And he's like, no, I just a job for a few months. They're like going to pay me a salary until we start building it, and then I'll leave. Unfortunately, we were never able to leave with Tinder. So from day one, we were in a position where we didn't have control of the company.
So we'll get into the corporate governance and drama as
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah. But let's first get into the actual kind of business, right? Like, so the first idea, and I think I told you this, but you know that like in the end of 2012, I did a hackathon, and I literally did this idea that was you could like, but it wasn't like, it was Facebook friends. It wasn't geolocation.
Yeah.
So this is, when did you guys?
I vaguely remember that. September 2012, August 2012.
So this is December 2012, actually. I hadn't heard about Tinder. And
This was what?
This is December 2012.
Wow.
I hadn't heard about Tinder, and I built this app.
You're in Brazil?
I was in Brazil.
Yeah.
And I came for this hackathon in Miami.
It wasn't in Brazil.
Grand. And so we did this, it's called Ask Me Out, which is basically I had a friend that was very nerdy. And he was like, oh, I go to college, and I only want this girl that's like my neighbor to know that I like her, only if she likes me back. Otherwise, I don't want her to know.
Wow.
So you could like and match your Facebook friends.
It just makes it safer, so you're not really putting yourself out there.
Exactly.
Unless you just say that you like someone when you don't, just to see if they like you.
Exactly.
So the premise, does it really work?
It didn't work, no.
No, but Tinder's built on the same premise.
Well, but the thing is, like, I think the story I'm going to tell is like someone after we won the hackathon came to us and said, dude, you guys should build a mobile app. I can just see you're like liking and not liking. And I was like, this is so stupid. Who like uses mobile, you know? Because I live in Brazil, so people didn't have smartphones.
Oh my God.
So I just thought it was the stupidest idea to like build a mobile app for it.
That's so funny. What percentage, I think back in 2012, if I remember correctly, like only 40% of Brazilians had smartphones.
I think way less than that.
But it ramped very quickly.
Yeah, it ran very quickly.
I remember early on, I was looking at where we should launch next. And because the auth was through Facebook, I needed to find markets where they had a high penetration of smartphones, but also had high penetration of Facebook.
Facebook was very big. I think the criticism that, you know, some people would have in Brazil was like, oh yeah, as soon as like Android, they built an app for Android, you know,
For Tinder?
Yeah.
Well, you know, Tinder, we didn't have Android for over a year.
Yeah.
So
but like, that's
one of the reasons that I think Tinder worked, because the quality of the user was actually, there were consumers that would spend more and that were more affluent. And I don't think that there's stats for this, but if you look at iPhone users versus Android, especially at that time, iPhone users were probably more attractive.
Oh yeah, well, there's definitely like a big correlation of wealth, right? And it was like iPhone was like way more expensive.
Yeah, but do you think there's a correlation between wealth and attractiveness?
Yeah, I think that's hard to disagree with.
What do you think the reason is?
I mean, you know, there's this saying like there's
taking care.
Yeah, like you just have a lot more money to spend on better diets, better healthcare, better skincare, better everything, better clothing, better everything, right? Like,
and wealthy guys usually marry more attractive women.
That's also true. Yeah. That's also true in reality.
Imagine how much more beautiful the world would be with those 17,000 billionaires that could have been the lost souls.
Yeah, you know, a lot of. I would definitely think that a wealthier world is definitely a more attractive world for sure. And you know, I think you see a lot of signs of that when products that were only available to rich people start going to the masses, right? Like, you know, everyone gets a little bit prettier, right? And you can make the argument of Ozempic now and a lot of stuff that's kind of...
I think it's the very early days of that.
Yeah,
the world will be way more beautiful in a few years.
I think so too. So
hopefully healthier too.
Healthier too, exactly. So, but like, let's go back to the Tinder story. When you were starting out Tinder, what was the first idea, like the first iteration of it? Was it exactly how it became to be, the swipe right and left, or there was like, that was an evolution?
The swipe left and right was more of an evolution. The first version, you actually click yes or no. Mm-hmm. More like a Game Boy.
Did you actually watch the social or know the social network story at this point with like face match and everything, or no?
I'm pretty sure I did, but didn't know the details of it. I don't know when that movie came out, but I think it was around the same time. Did the Facebook movie come out?
I think it was 2012.
I think it was. It was like a part of my subconscious, I think. So I knew the story, but Look, Facebook was a place where you connect with people that you already knew. And if you look at social media, there was a lot of peacocking. People were using it to attract the opposite sex or attract whoever they're attracted to. That wasn't 100% of the use case, but I think there was an underlying tone that was always prevalent. And Tinder just removed, it made it more direct. So that's—
And you know what's interesting? I actually met the guy who used to, because at some point Facebook launched some dating thing, right? I think
they did. I remember being worried about it. I don't think they allocated that many resources to it.
So you know what they told me that happened? I met the guy who ran it. And he told me that turns out people don't want to have the same profile for dating and for Facebook. Like the profile that they have for dating is like a very curated version of it for dating, which is not, you know, how they want to be perceived.
But I think what Facebook could have done, they could have pulled content from your Facebook, made it really easy, but then allowed you to have a separate profile. Right. So it was nuanced, but I think that they're one of the few companies that, maybe the only company, it's the biggest scale in terms of number of users, that is able to literally, if they want, copy a product and make it better and have it win.
Yeah.
There aren't a lot of companies that can do that. And the fact that, you know, with Tinder, we pulled content from Facebook. You weren't able to upload a picture that was not on Facebook. And the reason was you're less likely to lie
On Facebook.
Yeah, or put a photo of someone that's not you.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah, so it reduced the catfish.
For the first couple of years, it reduced catfishing to help build trust within the network. The key was just about building trust within the network. And we didn't want people to feel uncomfortable and weird using a dating platform, right? Because back then people were just using Match.com, and that was not for the younger demo. So the key was being able to get college students and people that were perceived as cool to use this new platform. So having it be the platform shift to mobile did help, but it was all those little things. It was the timing of it. It was the marketing strategy. And
so let's start with the numbers there. Like what are the months? When did you guys launch Tinder? What was first year, second year, kind of like user count, revenue, profits, everything? Like just give us like some of the numbers early on.
It was around August 2012 that we started, like, it was in the App Store, we were playing around with it. We had no users. On early September, I think it was like September 12th. It was a Thursday. I started texting people from my phone. I texted 300 or 400 people from my phone with a link to Tinder to download it.
And these are all like USC people?
Yeah, basically just sending them like a little note, and then also trying to get them to, answering questions or like trying to entice them to download it. But seeding it with the right people. It wasn't like—
What was the strategy? It was just like—
I sent it to like Paris Hilton, like anyone that I knew that I had met that I thought was like, wouldn't use Match.com, but would want to use, would want to meet people where other people would see that person and be like, whoa, like I'm not desperate. If this person's on it, then I could use it too. So it was about 3 or 4.
Did Paris Hilton sign up?
She did. I don't know if it was as a favor. At first she said no, but she later did.
So I can imagine, like, at that time, you're swiping through this thing or you're seeing it's like, oh, Paris Hilton's here?
I don't know if she was really using it, but she downloaded it, and like, you'd see her face, and it wasn't fake. It was really her.
But I'm saying, like, adds credibility to the thing. Right?
Yeah.
So you send it to these 300-400 people.
300-400 people. And at first, the first day was like, first few hours was kind of slow. I sent it between like Thursday and Friday. Then on Friday, what I started to see was, around 5 or 6 p.m., the number of profile ratings, I think we hit close to like 500 profile ratings. Profile rating is essentially just saying yes or no to a profile.
Like a swipe.
So imagine 500 total swipes. But then what I realized, as more and more people downloaded it, those numbers skyrocketed meaningfully. So maybe the next 2 hours went from 500 to 1,000, right? Because there's more people to see, and they would go through till the end. So then I was like, we're onto something. I was at a Shabbat dinner on Friday night in Santa Monica. I'll never forget this. And on Shabbat, you're not supposed to use your phone. You're supposed to be with your family. I was glued to my phone, just looking at the metrics, looking at the stats, refreshing it every 30 seconds. It's like, wow, like there were 5 more profile ratings. Like people are really, they're sitting there on their phone using it right now. And then it went from 1,000 to 2,000 in less than an hour. And everyone was upset that I was on my phone. I was at someone's house. I don't even know who it was. It was one of my mom's friends. I literally just left without saying bye. I get into my car. I was in a Range Rover. Never forget, pull down the windows. I turned on the heat because it was cold out, but I wanted the windows down because it just felt good. And I was like screaming and I was excited. I almost cried because I'm like, this is going to be massive. So if you like, imagine
Get that moment.
I'm in the
That's
car.
when
In
you're
that
like,
moment,
really-
I was like, this is going to be crazy.
because there was like, you just saw it, that
It's
it just
working.
doubled in
I'm
1 hour.
The engagement doubled. There were true network effects. With each incremental user, the value proposition for the original users
It's better.
is better. So then I knew like the people that had downloaded it earlier in that day, if they opened it again, there was a bunch more people to see, and most of them were in LA, so they would be able to see each other. Tinder was hard because we had to launch a product that is not relevant. Like if you're in Brazil, you're not a relevant user to me. So the proximity matters, right?
Yeah.
It's a local product.
Yeah.
And we had to create density in many markets in a very short period of time.
But to just,
While
let's go to the number. So 2,000.
so 2,000, then I got home. We hit 3,000. Like by the time I get home, I was in bed just refreshing the numbers. And before I went to sleep, we were over 5,000
swipes.
swipes off like, you know,
Then what was it?
few hundred, 400 or 500 users.
What was like a month later or something?
So then, so by the end of September, we ended up at like 4,000, 5,000 users. By the end of November, you know, we more than doubled again. And then we ended December with 48,000 users, right? It doesn't sound like a lot.
Well, it's mostly LA area, right? Like,
Yeah, it was mostly LA. And then we had also launched in a few college campuses.
yeah. We'll get to the marketing
And
strategy in a bit.
the 48,000, it went in January. It went to 450,000. So
In 1 month.
we grew over 900% in January of 2013.
What happened?
And that was another point where I'm like, oh man, I was like, I can go tell my dad there might
Yeah.
be a second Zuckerberg, and third and fourth and fifth.
Who's literally using
Look,
similar-
in some ways, Tinder today is a failure in terms of what it could have been. If you asked me then, I would have thought that Tinder could be bigger, and I do believe it would have been bigger if Sean and I maintained control of it and did what we wanted to do with it.
So then
It's been a one-trick pony, right? We haven't, the product hasn't really even innovated.
so 450,000 January. Then
450. Then we
But the-
started having major issues because it was built on prototype code in a matter of like 5 days. It couldn't handle the scale. I'm not an engineer, but I was so annoyed because I'm like, we're growing, and like the only risk is the product not working. So people were seeing the same profiles multiple times, and they assumed it's because we ran out of other people to show them, so we didn't want them to see
nothing.
But in reality, it's because we weren't registering the yes or no on the profile rating.
It's just like a bug.
Yeah, it was a big bug. And, you know, I just remember reading the App Store reviews like excessively. Like I wouldn't obsessively, like hours, like just going through every single App Store review, sending it to the engineers, telling them this isn't working, that's not working. To the point that a couple of them didn't want to work. They kind of gave up. So I'd see them like, they would be at the office just like sitting on a chair, and I'd be like, why the fuck are they sitting on a chair? They have to fix this or we're gonna die. Like it was existential risk. And Ryan Ogle, the CTO, I remember him telling me that it's basically like trying to change the engine of a car while going 200 miles per hour. So I was like, okay, it makes sense. It might take a little longer, but you know, it was a scary time because it was working. We had market fit. The users were there, but the actual product was broken.
Makes sense.
Scary.
Yeah. So like you're like, fuck, like
It was one of those
everything is
moments.
going well. The only thing that's broken is like this engineering thing.
Look, it took a while, but
And the
It got
growth
better.
kept coming, or like you just
no,
stalled?
the growth, it didn't stall, but it slowed down. It did slow down, but we were still growing. Like we got to over 1 million users 1.5 million users and the product still wasn't working. Like, I wouldn't use the word perfect. It wasn't close to perfect.
And then when did you hit 1 million users?
You know, I think it was like February.
Oh, 1 month later.
Yeah, 1 month later. And then,
What was it by December that year?
you know, it's very interesting. So in early December, this is rewind back to 2012. Early December, I had gone to Miami for Art Basel. Wanted to go, like, it'd be a fun trip.
Dude, that's when I was there for like the hackathon.
Oh, you were there?
Early December
I
2012.
was there.
Yeah.
I was there, and we were at Wall. It was a nightclub at the W, and we were gonna have a party afterwards.
For Tinder or no?
For Tinder, yeah. And I'll never forget, while we were sitting there, we hit 20,000 users. That's when we hit 20,000. It was early December. And I sent an email to the whole team telling them that we have now, like, our users can fill up the Staples Center. It's a local stadium in LA.
Yeah.
Have you been there?
Yeah.
So I was like, you know, I think they have like 18,600 seats. So I was like, there's literally that many people on Tinder. When you think about it that way in the early days, it's like,
A lot?
it's a lot. And then I said there'll be times where we'll be growing by 20,000 users per day. And I feel like it's around the corner. And ultimately we'll be growing by multiples of 20,000 per day, which we did. And actually,
A month later.
very short order. Yeah, we did hit 20,000, over 20,000 users per day in February. And then the following year, February of 2014, we actually grew. There was one day that we grew by 250,000.
But by the end of December, like what were the numbers?
So literally we grew by 12 and a half Staples Centers. Or actually more because it's only 18,600, but we grew by like 13 and a half Staples Centers. So it was thinking about it in that context. Sometimes when you think about numbers and humans, you don't realize that there's that many souls that are using your product in real time. Wait, so what was the numbers?
What was the number by December 2013? January was 450,000. By December, it was like how much?
I don't remember the exact the number of users, but we were over 10 million downloads.
Over 10 million.
And we had this product that you could actually see the downloads in real time.
Mm-hmm.
Pull it down, six new users. I put it down again, 3 more users.
Yeah.
2 more users, 8 more users. And
so at this point, you're like, this is a hit. This is like
this is a hit. We just can't mess it up.
Like it's ours to lose.
It's ours to lose. It felt like it was ours to lose even before we even got to 1 million users. And it's funny, the CTO actually, early on, I didn't want to do any ads because I wanted to make sure we get the right users. And then in certain areas where we didn't have reps or enough density, I actually tried Facebook ads. I don't think I've ever really talked about this. And for instance, in Turkey, I didn't know anyone that could help us in Turkey. We were acquiring male users on Facebook for 30 cents per user and about 50 or 60 cents for women. And I did this test where I realized Facebook ads, they give you more love if you uncap the pricing. So they'll throw more ads, and I uncapped it. And I was at dinner with the team, and the CTO did something where every new user was counted as 5.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I saw like we went
from
like no, it wasn't a bug. He did it on purpose because he knew I was checking it, and I didn't want to leave my computer. But everyone's like, "Yeah, just come to dinner," and so we were growing. Instead of growing, like I knew we were supposed to be growing by like 5, 6, 7, 8 users every time I refreshed. We were growing by like 30 or 40 users. So at first I was like, wow, this is crazy. And then I realized, oh my God, it's really growing fast. I think that we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on ads because I was testing not only Turkey, but also in the US where it costs a lot more. And I ran home to check the computer, and I realized that what he had done, it was like...
It was kind of like a prank?
It was a prank.
Yeah.
I think it's video of it, of me freaking out at dinner and like running off, getting out of the table and running home.
So to get the first 1 million users, like tell us about what was the kind of marketing user acquisition you had? You said you sent these first few hundred texts, then how do you get the first 1 million users? Like what were the strategies?
So let's rewind back to USC days. My freshman and second half of my freshman year and for my sophomore year, I threw events with my college roommate, Jasper Weir, who actually started a company called Task Us later on, and he became really successful. But at the time, we were just like little kids. It felt like we were 19 years old. We weren't even old enough to go to like a nightclub or a venue. We had fake IDs. Jasper would do more of create tickets and rent buses. And basically what we would do, we would lock in a venue. I would go to them and say, hey, I'm not going to rent it from you, but I guarantee that I'll bring you $10,000 of bar revenue. And if we hit 10,000, I want between 10 and 15,000, I want 25% of the revenue. Above 15, I want 30% of the revenue. So it was a bar guarantee. We would get the venue for free. And then I would get a musician, a performer. I would book talent, like Snoop Dogg, Corrupt, the Loonies. Each event would have someone different. And we would sell tickets, rent buses, and have the buses go back and forth from USC and some other schools in LA, local area. Now, the first time it took me a couple weeks to sell the tickets. I was selling them myself. So I'd have to meet up with people. I think we would charge like $25 or $50 before the event and then $100 at the venue if they didn't have tickets and they went to the door. Price gouging. And I was like, doesn't scale. It's taking up too much of my time. If you actually spend way less time on this and make a little bit less, it's way better. So what I did was I went to all the fraternities and sororities at USC and told them, I need your help selling tickets. And we had Monday night chapter dinners where everyone from the fraternity and sorority would sit in one room, eat food, and then have a meeting. So I told them, during your meeting, can you please stand up and tell them about this party at this venue with this performer and sell tickets? So
they became her distribution channel.
That became the distribution channel. It was very effective. So I would tell them that for every 10 tickets you sell, you get one for free. Right? So if you're selling them for $50 each, right, you pay $4.50, you can keep yours for your ticket is free when you sell 10. You sell 20, you make $50. You sell 40, you make $150, or you could give it to 3 of your friends for free. I don't really care. But what I found was we were able to sell out in 2 days.
Wow.
Right? I'll give it to them on Monday. By Wednesday, we were done. So it went from 2 weeks of me doing it alone to having like 10 or 20 reps and selling out in 2 days, which was great. So when I was thinking about Tinder, I was like, I stopped doing that after a year. My mom was like, this is beneath you. Like, you shouldn't be selling tickets. Yeah, you're not a promoter. Like, I'm not a promoter. I'm throwing events.
Yeah.
And I realized, I'm like, okay, this is not going to be my future.
Promoter.
It's not my future. And I stopped doing it, but I learned a lot from it. I was like, wow, So I was looking back, I'm like, how can we appeal to a bunch of college kids for a product where you need relevance in terms of who the users are, the age, right? The demo of the user and proximity of the user. So there was nothing better than colleges. And literally, I didn't have to think too much about it. I was like, okay, well, it's very obvious. You're going to go to Monday night chapter dinners, which is basically what we did at Tinder, which was essentially most of the early growth.
Didn't you sponsor beer or something for the parties too?
Yeah. So early on, a lot of the reps were just my brother's friends that were in college, or my sister's friends who were in college, or my friends' younger siblings that were in college.
What were the most,
we had,
besides USC, what are the big colleges for Tinder early on?
So USC was, basically, I looked at a map and I was like, we looked for party schools with lots of fraternities and sororities with a Greek life. So USC was the first. Austin, UT
Austin,
SMU, basically any school. My sister had gone to SMU also, Southern Methodist University or something. It's a small school. Yeah, so basically, Boulder, schools where Arizona was a really big one.
Would you travel to
Arizona
yourself
University?
to set this up?
No, I wouldn't do it. We would get reps
Like, how do you meet a rep in
They
Arizona?
were my sister's friends or brother's friends or my friends.
So just through the network, you always
Yeah,
find
through the network. I
reps.
knew a lot of people, and we would find 2 or 3 reps in each school. And instead of just doing it in their own fraternity or sorority, they would actually walk during Monday night deliveries. So basically, at USC, for instance, you could get a gift, and like guys would send flowers to girls and invite them to formals or whatever. We would just have someone go and say, it was actually my sister and my ex-girlfriend that was working at Tinder. I was there, like for USC, I was there, but for like UCLA and SMU, I didn't do it myself. Like it wouldn't have.
You were like, yeah, of course.
It was more about just directing people what to do. We had like a program where
So you got
we would
them.
give them stickers, and like we did like crazy shit that you get in trouble for.
Crazy shit.
Like I sent stencils to all of them with spray paint and said, go to like somewhere that you won't like get expelled, but stencil on the floor, like Tinder, find me on Tinder. So we'd actually have stencils that say, find me on Tinder, graffitied onto the floor.
This is all like super cheap stuff that was like
Free, basically close to free. Stickers, put stickers all over the place, plaster your whole dorm with stickers. We would drop notes in terms of like, just like pranks, like Tinder swag. And then, have people go into a classroom filled with as many people as possible, like big auditoriums, and wear a Tinder shirt and pretend, like ask for the teacher, and pretend that they matched on Tinder. So just like a prank, but everyone's like, whoa, Tinder, like this is crazy. Over 500,000 of the million were college kids. And the way to know, we were looking at at that time, you actually were even able to use it as a minor. So 13 to 17 year olds could see each other. That was about 5 or 6% of our user base. So siblings of college kids, I would say.
Yeah.
Then 18 to 25 was, like around 50% of our users, 50 something percent. And then 28 to 35 it's like somewhere in the 20s. And then it just continued to dwindle down. And we even had like 1% that was 65 plus as we scaled, which was cool to see. It was easily replicated, that growth strategy, from throwing events in colleges. So I'm glad that I did that, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have known how effective it was.
I remember hearing the Tinder parties were epic. Like,
so you asked me about that. So
yeah.
We would throw Tinder parties. The first Tinder party was actually at my parents' house. It was in September 2012. So shortly after we had launched, we didn't even have, it was before we had 5,000 users. We didn't have maybe like 1,500 users at that time. And I'll never forget, we had gotten big Tinder signs, and I'd put the Tinder signs like on the house. And it was visible if you were driving not from the backyard, you couldn't see it, but from the front of the house.
Yeah.
And I vividly remember my mom, she's like, what's that? I'm like, it's just a Tinder logo. And I remember her saying, this is not a whorehouse. I was like, what? I was like, it's not. Like Tinder is like, it's for dating. It's not that, Mom. And now she always tells everyone like, oh, the first Tinder party was at my house. She like shows them a photo. But at the time, it was a bit controversial.
Yeah. So
basically the point was,
but what were
we bust people the same way I did for the parties. We bust them from USC. There was a friend of my brother's whose birthday it was. So we're like, why don't you use our house for your birthday party? We'll have a pool party. And we had like 4 buses filled with USC kids. And in order to get into the house, everything was free, but in order to get in, you just had to download Tinder. So automatically we seeded it with like a few hundred users at USC on that day. And we did that internationally as well. We did that all around the world, where we would sponsor parties, like open bar for the first hour, like $500 or whatever. But you have to download Tinder. Like you have to show Tinder to the door guy in order to get into the party. That was one of the things that the reps had to execute locally.
One of the things that makes me think here in this story is that, look, the reality is this company probably couldn't have been started if there wasn't a founder who understood how to do all these things, right? Like it'd be hard to actually execute.
It could have been started, but it wouldn't have gone anywhere.
Yeah.
It's like building the most beautiful building in the middle of nowhere, where the building exists, but there are no users.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, I think.
So the reality that you were in a frat, you did like to party, you did like to get girls. That was like the seed.
What else did I do?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. That was the seed for what became like a massive company, right? Like, you know, when did Tinder start becoming profitable?
Early on, once we actually hit 1 million users, we didn't have control of the company. So I see and match, without naming who it was, but I had a very vivid conversation with someone who essentially, I mean, he started OkCupid, this guy. So imagine Match had bought OkCupid and we had to report to him. And he's like, congratulations, you hit 1 million users. It's time to monetize.
Yeah.
And they're like, what do you mean? Like, we're not monetizing now. He's like, no, I think you are. He's like, OkCupid was monetizing well before we hit 1 million users. But over a 1 week period, I had to actually convince him that it would be foolish to monetize now and risk the future growth, because, you know, I was able to extrapolate from third-party data of other companies that we could, but if we monetize in the wrong way, it would hurt growth to the point that could be like, we would maybe double the user base by the end of the year versus getting to 10 million plus users. So I was saying, yes, we forego 1 year of revenue, but we're going to make sure that we have a much larger user base before we begin to monetize. And so we didn't really monetize Tinder until we had tens of millions of users ultimately. And Tinder was actually profitable. You won't believe this. How much money do you think it cost before Tinder became profitable?
Total spend?
Yeah. Total spent on everything.
15 million.
Yeah, like more like 6 million.
6 million?
That's why I look at these companies, I'm like, wow, these are overfunded, spoiled kids. You don't need, I think it's so important to spend and allocate your dollars in the right places, especially early on, because that's when you're building culture, right? So if you were raised in a land of excess, that culture continues. And whereas with Tinder, at the time, we were like annoyed because we're like, oh man, we're controlled by a larger company. We have all these term sheets at crazy valuations. They won't let us take it. But I don't think it actually hurt us that much.
But when you turned on monetization, how much money did you start making?
In the first year?
Yeah.
I think we made it was a partial year, and I think revenue was like close to 50 million.
50? 50, and
then the next year was like meaningfully higher.
Like how much?
Maybe 180 something million.
Wow. Super profitable.
Yeah, super profitable. Tinder's doing over 2 billion in revenue now. I think it's still like it's a $30 stock right now. It's like an $11-12 billion company doing $2 billion plus in revenue, doing over $1 billion in EBITDA.
Yeah.
I think closer to 1.5 billion in EBITDA. I think it's actually a good value play. The overall dating market is growing at like 10% year over year. I think Match is growing around the same, 9%. And it has so much more potential. The reason I think Tinder is a failure in terms of what it could have been, we could have drastically expanded the user base if we were able to attract users that were not looking for dates or a spouse. Right?
Like looking for what? Like friends, business connections, that kind of stuff?
So imagine, we have the density and we have the product, right? Close proximity. We have users everywhere, all over the world. Imagine, you've told me about some friends. I've told you about some friends. You've never necessarily met some of those people. I've never met some of your friends. But do you think it would be weird if I was at a hotel and I got a push notification that said, hey, so-and-so, regardless of sexual orientation, so-and-so is here at the bar if you want to get a drink with him? Like, I wouldn't think it's weird. I have no problem walking 20 feet and being like, oh, hey, like I've heard about you, and having a conversation, learning something. I mean, if you do that, married people could use Tinder. Not for dating, but
just to meet new people.
Yeah, just to meet new people. I think that could be one of the biggest products in the world.
Yeah.
The real value proposition. And then in my mind, you would go online and offline. So if you don't want to see someone, if you don't want to be social, you don't want to meet anyone, you just go offline. It works in the background. And there will be a big company one day that does that. The challenge and the reason that there hasn't been is people have tried variations of it, but they don't have density to start. Tinder has that density.
You know, probably going through Tinder, you saw so much of like dating patterns, right? Like what did you learn about dating, you know, seeing like all the data there? Like what are some interesting stats and like what did you learn?
Basically, I realized women are truly more selective than men. So the number of right swipes for men is historically around 70%. 70% yes, 30% no. And if you look at women, it's, you know, they say yes 10% of the 70. So 7% of the time they're saying yes, and 93% of the time they're saying no.
Wow,
pretty crazy.
Very different.
And then
what about gay men?
If you look at gay men, it's somewhere in the middle, actually.
Oh, really?
It's around like 25 to 30% yes.
Because I remember like talking to my friends and using Tinder at the time. And I guess like the default was, well, I'm just going to swipe right. And then whoever matches with me, I'll decide, right? But like until someone matches, you know, I don't have any business being that selective. I guess that's the mentality, right?
Yeah, but the way I think about it, if you know you're not going to like someone anyways, why say yes?
Well, because then you have to like think about it if you're not swiping, right?
Yeah, but that's a part of the fun.
Yeah,
I guess. If you just say yes. And I mean, a lot of people use it that way. So
yeah.
I think the point is men use it that way more than women.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think women use it that way.
No, not at all. Not at all. And what about like pictures or descriptions? Like any interesting things?
I think the more pictures you have and the more, you know, information you have within reason is better.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Because if you have less content, you could be catfishing.
Just sounding more authentic.
Yeah, just being authentic. It's just, you know, if you meet up with someone that you don't know, you want to at least see a few photos and like, you know, zoom in a little bit and like,
okay. Now the question,
you know, like try to learn more about the person, you know, like what do they like to do? Hobbies. People are attracted to that, I think.
You were like the first kind of like OG canceled tech guy.
I was canceled before it was cool.
You were canceled before canceling was even like a thing.
I was canceled hard.
I remember reading actually the articles that came out early on, and
they're like,
I was
this asshole.
Yeah, well, you know, I just thought, I didn't even know the articles like that, you know, like it wasn't a thing, right?
Yeah. I didn't know either, but there was like a whole press team behind that.
Yeah.
Just like,
how did that feel? Like, how was that experience?
It was one of the worst moments of my life. I'd say after my uncle passing away, he died when he was 30 and I was like 14. That was probably the second worst day of my life. For so many reasons. Because
what was the game plan? Like, what happened that day?
You're like reading an article and you're like, wow, this person's a real asshole. And then you're like, that person's me. And there's like thousands and thousands of articles out there. And I'm in this position where I can't respond because I need to protect my equity. The company is trying to claw back my equity if I say anything. I'm not sued personally, unfortunately, so I don't have the right to even respond. They had complete control. And, you know, I just had to sit there and take it and just wait till it blows over, which was very hard.
How do you think that, like, what did you think at that day? Like, what was,
you know, it was just really hard because without getting into too much detail, it was like a long-term relationship that I had with someone where we really cared for each other. And then we broke up. We went through like a bad breakup, but honestly, it wasn't even that bad. Like we could have been friends today. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't something that we weren't enemies. Like I cared about her. I wanted her to do well. And I think she cared for me as well.
You know, you've been incredibly successful after the fact, after Tinder. And I think, you know, you definitely made way more money post-Tinder than you did pre-Tinder.
Yeah, way more. But
then like, it still feels like, you know, even in this conversation, we're talking about it, right? You're still a little bit guarded, right? If you want my advice on it, I think you should, dude, it's been so long, you paid a price, you know, you should embrace and be more open, you know, and talk more about your experience because it's been so, you do such amazing things, you know, even Tinder obviously is unbelievable, but even after Tinder, I think it's negative for the world if people like you are not sharing their stories and fear of repercussion, you know, and I think we're moving to a world with that going direct. You're not depending on journalists anymore, and you can just, say your version of stuff.
I'm very hopeful about the future. The ironic part is not a single journalist even talked to me.
Really?
So it's like you
just wrote the article.
You can make a one-sided allegation about anyone, file a lawsuit, and then the next day, whether the content's authentic or not, you could even lie. You could say whatever you want, and that press will eat it up because they're in the business of arbitraging eyeballs. And if it's a sexy story, in my case, it's like, oh, this like frat bro, Tinder founder, Tinder co-founder, so it's a juicy story.
Yeah.
In general, I don't think you need to put yourself out there too much either. There's not that much benefit, but hopefully today is the start of something new. Maybe once a year we could do a podcast.
I would love that. I absolutely do. So let me ask you a question. When you met your wife, did you tell her to not Google you? Or did you say something about?
No, I was so insecure that I would make sure to tell her before I even met her.
Oh, really?
Hey, by the way, I got in trouble for sexual harassment. My girlfriend sued me for sexual harassment.
That was your opening line,
I harassed my girlfriend. But trust me, I'm not that bad.
Yeah.
No, so I actually told her before we even met that, hey, whatever.
Just FYI, so you're not.
No, I don't even know if I said it FYI. I don't know how it came up, but it came up before we met. And
before you started dating.
No, before I even met her, I told her.
But how did you tell her before you met her?
I don't know how it came up. We talked before the day that we were meeting up. We texted or something, or talked, and then.
So while you're texting to set up a meeting, you already told her what happened.
I just didn't want to feel uncomfortable about something once I know someone.
How does she react?
So it's one thing when 99.8% of the world that you don't know thinks something of you, but then once you, my tight circle, which I have a lot of amazing friends, that doesn't matter. But, when you're meeting someone new who doesn't know you, I just wanted to get it out of the way, I guess.
How did she react?
She didn't care.
She didn't give a fuck?
She thought it was funny that I was telling her.
I like that too. Just being authentic, right? You're definitely one of the most authentic people I know. So,
by the way, it has affected me in business in certain times also.
Oh, really? How come?
Oh, yeah. There's been times especially with female founders that a couple of times when I wanted to invest in their companies, we had a great call. And then after they Googled me, they're like, oh, this guy, sexual harassment. And then there was another case, actually, it's very interesting. There's a company called Whop. I actually did this investment from my fund a few years, 3 years ago. The company was being sold. He had an offer to sell the company for $3 million. So over the weekend, I had to convince them that selling would be foolish and that they'd lose control and that, they would just own a tiny, tiny piece of a larger company and that their life would suck, basically. And I was successful in convincing them not to. And then the second step was letting me invest. And we had agreed on terms. I was going to invest at the same price, $3 million valuation, which was, they didn't have much, but I really liked the founder and what they were building. So he agreed to let me invest. I'd signed docs, and then he's like, by the way, he's like, he called me. He's like, I want to talk to you about all that stuff. And, I didn't get into the details of it, but I was just like, listen, I was 26 years old. I went through a bad breakup. It sucked. It was a very two-sided thing. There's two sides to every story. I never said my side of the story. Probably never will. But if that really bothers you that much that you're concerned about me investing, it's a good filter. I think we'll both regret it. But maybe I wouldn't, I don't want to invest in someone who is woke or believes everything that they read in the media anyways. And he was like, you know what? I would love to have you invest. I invested. My company is now, I don't think I'm allowed to say what it is, but it's become a massive company. I don't think they've announced the round, but it's going to be a multi-billion dollar company, and it's very close to already being one now. And I almost missed that opportunity. And there's a few stories like that where I ended up not investing, but it comes up in both your personal life and business. So I think that I admire certain people that put themselves out there, but it takes, you need to be willing to have that way of life. being a public person, which I've not been a public person.
Definitely not.
I've gone out of my way.
What would you have done differently?
I really don't know. I have no idea. I went through a bad breakup. There were a couple days where it's like fighting and whatever. And then that gets, it's put out there in a certain context without so much additional information. But I think what I would do is just...
if you're giving advice to your younger self.
I have no idea what I would have. Don't put yourself out there. Just don't let things get too heated in either direction. And don't date someone that you work with. Yeah. I don't know, but lines are blurred and you're just like having fun and you're working and you just like, sometimes it just happens. So I always wanted the best for her anyways. It's like,
let me ask you a question, like a deep question, like, what do you regret about this whole thing? Like, what would you advise your younger self to do differently, given everything you've been through?
I think that if I was speaking to my younger self, I would say that, when it comes to dating and relationships, nobody's perfect. And there'll be ups and downs like that you experience in every relationship. And when you're breaking up, you may say things that you don't necessarily mean to get a reaction from that person, or, for whatever reason, everyone, both sides say bad things to each other that they don't necessarily mean. And I think that when you date someone that you work with, that's just amplified even more. And all rules go out the window. I think the key is try your very, very, very best to not date someone that you're working with. And at the time I thought I was doing a good job. I was like, oh, we broke up, but like, I'm just going to do my work and I'm going to keep things separate. But it's pretty much impossible. If you imagine breaking up with someone and then going to see them in the office every day, it's like, you're setting yourself up for disaster. So I think it's just best not to do it, regardless of how you feel.
Yeah, no, I think definitely regular breakups are hard. Breakups when someone else's both careers have impact with the breakup, right?
Yeah.
Like that's always...
Yeah, especially when you're kids. I was, in my case,
yeah.
I was...
How old are you?
26 years old.
Yeah. You're like, you're a baby.
I don't know what was going on. I was just optimizing to build a big company.
And nothing.
And then I was careless and I made mistakes. And I think that, it sucks, but it is what it is.
It is what it is. And it's been how long now?
Maybe it's been 10 years.
10 years. So dude, it's been 10 years. You're married, have 2 kids,
Yeah, I have 2 kids. I've never posted them on social media.
Exactly.
Keep things very private. And literally that's the most rewarding aspect of life. I think universally, like having a child, planting a seed basically and fostering its growth and trying to help it. Like it's the most selfless. It's the only time where, for me, where I actually care about something so much more than myself.
Yeah, totally. So let's go now in a post-Tinder world, right? Like you became, extremely successful investors underground, and, obviously made a lot more wealth from after Tinder that you actually made from Tinder. So before actually we go there, just
I had some making up to do. I lost a lot of equity.
Yeah, so just give like a 2-minute version of what happened with Tinder. We don't need to get into the whole story, and then kind of what you did after.
So basically, I got kicked out of the company. I lost a meaningful amount of my equity, and then I was a part-time advisor for a few years after.
How much do you think that all of this costed you between getting kicked out and the missed opportunity at Tinder? Like, how much do you think you would have made?
It cost me billions.
Billions, right?
Yeah, more than one, many
billions. Yeah. If you had kept your equity and kept the business, you had made billions more.
Yeah, and there was, by the way, also it was my equity, but then there was also, we were in a big lawsuit with IAC over the valuation as well.
So then what did you do after? You got some money out of the company. What did you do after?
I basically was in a position where I could just like be like, okay, you know, my life kind of sucks. I got kicked out of my company, but I have all this money and I don't really need to do anything. Well, that's not me at all.
Were you more successful than your dad at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, it was more like the satisfaction, like, am I going to do nothing? Like,
Yeah.
it still wasn't like what I wanted for myself monetarily, but it just also would be a sad, boring life. So I basically had to reinvent myself and I didn't really know what I was going to do. At first, it was really hard because I was watching Tinder and I was watching like critical mistakes that I feel like I would have never done. Just like little things, you know, they were spending money on certain stuff, but not even getting, you know, the results that they needed to get for doing that. They weren't able to launch product features, things that just seemed very obvious there that I was trying to help however I could, but it was, you know, my hands were kind of tied. I had less than 1 foot in. That was unhealthy. It's a very unhealthy feeling. Imagine like trying to co-parent your child, but do it from Zoom part-time. You know, it just doesn't work. And basically, I had a lot of relationships that I had formed as a result of Tinder, and I had capital. I didn't want to give it to like an investment bank for them to do it for me. So I started off making private investments in companies. I'd actually started before Tinder, but I just increased my check size post-Tinder and work my way up. As I got more and more comfortable, I would write bigger and bigger checks. I was doing really well. I was up probably over 20x in aggregate from the dollars I invested. And I would share deals with really good investors, people that I respected. And one of those people basically convinced me to start a fund. I think he had missed.
Is it public who that is?
No, it's not public. I haven't talked about it, but I mean, it's Peter Thiel.
Yeah.
So basically he was just like, why don't you start a fund? Like, I'm like, honestly, I don't want to start a fund. And the reason is, he's like, why? The reason is I don't want to feel like I report to someone. I want to feel like I could go on vacation for a couple of weeks. My wife's family is in the UK and not feel like I need to work. And he was like, I really don't care about that. You can do whatever you want. And it was like, if it wasn't him specifically, I would have never started a fund. People had asked me all the time, but I just was like, can I give you money and co-invest with you? I'm like, no, I don't want the responsibility. And I just didn't want that. And at first I thought it was just going to be like an LLC that we formed that was my money and Peter's money. And then I realized that basically it was like, I needed to create a real fund that was like SEC regulated filings and stuff like that, audited financials. So then I was like, maybe I should raise a little bit more. So then I did a small fund, which was mostly me and Peter for fund 1. And then I did fund 2 with a few more investors. And then what happened was I deployed like the first fund in 9 months. Then the second fund, I deployed around 70% of it in the first year. And then the market turned. And I was like, wow, like if you look at my average return at a normal time, I'm far outperforming my peers. And even during this bad time, I'm going to outperform, but it's not as good as it could have been if the market didn't turn. So I increased the fund size slightly. There's like a short window. I think there's like up to a 1-year period. So in the last few months, I raised a little bit more, but I was already essentially 70% deployed. And I didn't want to invest at that time because I saw a big discrepancy between private and public markets. So I'm looking at companies on the private market that are like 10 times more expensive than they should be when you're looking at public comps. So then with my own capital, I started investing more. I had always done this, but I basically just started spending more time on it, taking meaningful positions in companies that were really beaten up, like blue chip companies I knew would come back, but at that time, for whatever reason, they were really, really getting crushed. And I took sizable positions. And now I have a whole hedge fund. My hedge fund is just my own capital, which is the same size as my fund. It started off with a lot less. What I did, I used options as well to enhance the return. We were on a trip in Paris and I was actually getting crushed because what I had done, I didn't explain it to you at the time, but I had sold puts on stocks, right? Which means that I was a forced buyer at a certain price at a certain time in the future.
Yep.
I felt comfortable owning those stocks at those prices, right? But I'd given myself 15 months for it to play out. And literally 3 or 4 months later, I like sold puts on Facebook at 200, 180, 160, 140, where I collected a premium. So my cost basis was lower than those strikes, but let's say on the 200s, I collected $31. My cost basis would be $169. Stock is trading at $90 and I get put all of the stock where I'm automatically down millions of dollars just upon receiving it. Meanwhile, on the way down, once it broke 150, I was buying stock. And once it went lower, I started buying call options, leaps that were like over a year out. I was down on those leaps originally, and then I continued buying all the way down. I was down as much as like 80%, 75% on some of these positions. And then some of those positions became, a 20x. So from the bottom, it's like the return was like an 80x or 90x. And then I also bought actual calls at that time, which ended up being like, 70, 80, 90, 100 times. And then I did that with a few other companies where now I have like really big position. I still have a really big position in Facebook that's like over $100 million, which, I would have never had if it wasn't for the market getting crushed the way that it did and me getting put all that stock.
And so what would you say, I forgot if it was Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger that said that, you shouldn't trade in options because if you're smart, you don't need it. If you're
told me that at the time.
And obviously, you seem to be very successful with them. Like, why?
So I think that's really referring to short-term options.
No, I think it's referring to all options, but...
Well, if you give yourself... It depends. Like, I actually would disagree with that. I think that if you know what you're doing, you have to be lucky also. It can't be a long-term bear market, but it comes back down to money management. As long as you're not putting all your money and you still have powder on the side, you can adjust the position to make yourself...
They're saying it's like it's always a small amount of dollars, a very high upside kind of thing versus like big amount of dollars.
So then you just have to adjust. So if you're wrong, you keep buying. What I like to do is actually something different. I don't know. I mean, it's a bit granular, but I buy a lot of calls that are far out of the money, but I give myself time. If it goes my way, we're good. If it doesn't go my way, I actually roll down that strike price to a more achievable price. So let's say for the sake of simplicity with Facebook, let's say I bought calls at 200 and when it went to 90, you could roll them down to like 180 or 160. You pay a little bit more. You're down on your original position, but then you lower that price so that it's more achievable if the market, once the company turns. And then, and you can also buy yourself more time. So instead of 12 months out, you could go 18 months out and buy the same strike or double your position. So you constantly have to monitor it and adjust it. But when you actually really believe in a company and it goes down, you should buy more. And if you could lower the goalpost and make it easier to achieve, I would adjust those. So does that make sense? So it's not like... It's actually very interesting. I could talk about this for a while.
We're going to have a whole podcast
about this. Podcast about this strategy, but it allows you to have venture-like returns in public markets. Right? I don't think it would be fun to make 20, 30% on my money. If you look at the performance in the last 18 months, I'm up about 30x.
Wow. That's crazy. That's fucking crazy. So, you went from being an entrepreneur to now like full investor, even a hedge fund manager. You turned 40 in 2 years, right?
Yeah.
What do you see yourself, right? Like in your 40s, like, is it the same thing? You just want to become a bigger and bigger hedge fund manager, venture capitalist? You think you'll ever build another company? Like, is it like status quo or something's going to change?
Never say never. So I don't really know exactly what the future holds. What I do know is if I did nothing different than I'm doing today, I think I would be happy because basically when I find I can go back and forth between private and public markets depending on the time. So when something's overvalued or undervalued, I could adjust. And then I'm also doing a lot of like real estate, passive real estate investments. So from like a work standpoint, you know, I need to kind of decide if I want to institutionalize what I'm doing, take larger amounts of capital, build a team around me, or have the flexibility of doing what I'm doing now, where I'll do, you know, at the right times, raise a fund. Like right now, I may not want to raise a fund, but in 6 months, I may want to raise a fund. I could raise
but you found that
500 million and then deploy that over the next 18 months. And then if I don't think the timing's right, go back to public markets because I see more opportunity there. So it's like,
but you found yourself as an investor. Like now you've seen yourself.
As an investor, look, I connect more with founders. So I always want to have an element of that in my life. Like I kind of think of myself as like the grandpa or the godfather of certain companies where I have big positions. I sometimes go and spend the whole day and help them with product or help them with whatever they need help with. But then at the end of the day, I can go home and just, you know, it's like, you take care of the kid.
Yeah.
I don't want to clean the diapers, but I want to have fun. So I am getting the best of both worlds. And what's interesting, I think when you're investing in companies, you're actually learning a lot more overall because you don't have tunnel vision where you're focused on one thing day in and day out, and you have perspective. So I'm learning so much about so many different technologies and so many different companies all around the world. So I find it really fascinating, and I enjoy watching the company go from like essentially nothing to becoming a large company and then being a part of that journey. Will I ever start a company? I don't know. If I do, I'll be way better and way more efficient with my time.
Yeah.
To the point, I don't even take meetings anymore, by the way. I don't know if you've noticed that, but if someone tries to schedule a call, I'll very rarely schedule a call, not more than a few calls per week that are actually scheduled. Because that allows me the flexibility to have long, you know, multi-hour conversations with founders I've invested in or founders I want to invest in, and allows me to do basically whatever I want.
Freedom of your schedule, right?
Full freedom of your schedule. Like, you know how you used to have like calls every 30 minutes and
Oh yeah.
I hate that.
Yeah.
It's like, what's the quality of life goes down. So it's like the way that it works with me, it's frustrating for people because they're like, they want to schedule a call. I'm like, I always avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I end up calling people on the fly when I have an opening and I'm thinking about them and hope that they pick up. And
I noticed that.
Yeah. But what I realize is everyone picks up. If you don't schedule calls and you call them, they'll pick up.
Yeah, a lot of times too. Okay.
So it's not as bad as it sounds.
Yeah, no, it doesn't sound bad at all.
But there's certain
sounds like you try to find the things that matter and focus on it and not have a lot of pre-scheduled stuff.
And then I have like 10, 20 friends that I know that I need to schedule things with where their schedule is always like that. So that's when I schedule the calls.
Yeah.
Or a first time call has to be scheduled.
That makes sense. Well, Justin, we're running out of time here, but dude, this was awesome. I really appreciate it. I know you don't do this stuff at all, and I really appreciate you doing this.
I actually enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. You know, we got to spend some more time together, and
you're good. You're good at doing this, by the way.
Thank you, man.
I'm excited to watch your other interviews.
Yeah. There's a few coming out, but you know, I think this one will be a highlight. This was Justin Mateen, the co-founder of Tinder and now prolific investor. Thank you so much for watching HD and HD.
Thanks to our friends at Atomic Growth for helping with production and distribution.